Question?
Sorry, Brian. No, sorry. I should have said that a bit more clear. I mean, like, lots of people don't really look into things in the depth they should do, but yet they'll run with what they think is right because they've heard something that literally through Chinese whispers.
Yeah.
You know.
No, but that is very true. There is a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been saying, not every broadcast, but we do say it, you know, for people to go away and check it and look into it themselves. And I know Ian Crane certainly does that. But the other reason it is important for people to do it is once they've seen the evidence with their own eyes, they've actually done that work. They believe it and they have confidence to talk about it because they know it is true. So maybe it ties in a little bit of, was it Michael Louise said just now, of people sort of getting on bandwagons and following a Pied Piper who did the that was you, Malcolm, okay. Yeah, and I think that does go on, and all we can do is keep pushing people to get in there and research it. But the other thing I think is important is that people are encouraged to research in areas that they find interesting. I mean, I watch stuff going on with the law. I am interested in what everybody's talking about, common law. I think I understand some of it. I've experienced being in court and doing some of it, but I would never put myself forward to run a programme or go on stage talking about it, because clearly I'm not an expert on it. There are other people much better placed than I am. So we recognise that you've got to stay in certain areas where you've got knowledge and expertise. And I think that's another worrying area, that we do see more people starting to talk over the internet about subjects where really they're only regurgitating what they've picked up from somebody else. And that's not good, I don't think.
Totally agree.
Well, Brian, it's Paul. Would it be fair to say that you could possibly put out an announcement, not every day, probably once every so many days, for people to do the research properly, to force people into looking into these areas, rather than they say, like say, following the Pied Piper?
I think really what that boils down to really is a human problem at the moment, in that we are bred to think that we need a leader, or that we need to look to somebody else for answers, that we don't have the answers ourselves, or that we couldn't find the answers ourselves, would be a more accurate way of saying that. So I think that we're kind of bred that way, and naturally there will always be, I mean, I naively came into this thinking that, you know, people could save themselves, or that, you know, the revolution will be so big that people will be leading themselves, but as Mike has battered me into submission, and it made me realise the truth that just isn't the case. There are always going to be these huge groups of people that are going to look to somebody else just simply because they don't have their own personal responsibility yet. And that's okay, because this is a work in progress, and that's fine. So I think we're always going to have those people. I think what's important is that we are responsible for ourselves, and that you personally do your own research, and all the people in the room with you personally do their own research. That's really what's important. But I think naturally we're always going to have, as much as I dislike it, we're always going to have these large groups of people that are going to look to leaders and for other people to give them answers. I think that's just part and parcel of what people are like at this moment in time, I think.
Well, I agree. Excuse me. I agree with that. We do recognise, though, that when we've asked for people to research in areas that we, for whatever reason, have got interested in, we are getting some very good quality research back. The BBC is one subject which seems to have fired up people, so we've been getting some good information about the BBC. We're getting a lot of good information to do with children's charities. But the other thing is that Mike has done a lot of work to encourage some of the people on our forums to form specific groups, and they are then researching areas that they think are important. We don't direct them. It works the other way around. They will be coming to us and saying, look, we've gone into this area, look what we found, this is really important. And then we are trying to react to what they're showing us. So there was some particularly good work done on basically the system of world government and Agenda 21. And I'm looking for the government's, what do you call it, government by... Yeah, participatory government was one of the really good areas that they got into. This is how the United Nations is looking to set up the one government system. So we are asking for help, and if we ask for help, obviously the areas we're asking for help in we think are important. We've got these other specialist groups digging into areas that they think are important, and I think that dovetails in with what Malcolm's just said, because if we keep leading where people research, we colour it with our own impression of what is important, whereas I've had people turn up and, well, I say this repeatedly, every time I've heard a story from somebody I think there isn't a better one, and then somebody will turn up and start talking, I think, wow.
But that's what media should be. That's exactly what it should be, not from the top down, but should be from the bottom up.
Yeah, so that's the answer, really.
When you look at normal, let's call it normal news, mainstream, and it's all war, gore, doom and gloom, and apparently, and finally at the end when the cat got stuck up the tree, the nice fireman came to fetch it down, and then everybody thinks the world's wonderful again, till the next news. I, for one, then, I don't know, what's this RT? So you start to watch RT, and quite quickly, you kind of think, hang on a minute, this is just a different slant on the same thing, and it's almost like the alternative media is now becoming the media. And I just want to hand the microphone to Jason on this, because he's got quite a good point with this.
Yeah, basically, I've been looking at the work of a guy called Lennon Honor, Lenonhonor, and he's written a book. He's a guy in the United States. He's written a book called the 911 Fear-Based Mind Control System, and he can predict, well, he claims he can predict what is going to happen based upon whichever anniversaries are coming up. So he will suggest that in the 6 weeks before 9/11 there'll be all sorts of stories with trigger words and trigger numbers, like 911 is a trigger number, or Syria, which is equated to Iraq. Iraq again is sort of connected to 9/11 because we were told they were harbouring terrorists in Iraq. And also he talks about, which I've noticed in TV programmes, such as my wife watches EastEnders, unfortunately, so sometimes I'm sort of sat there and watching it, and it's what I can only describe as emotion porn, if you will. So they're trying to make people emotional, and also all these soaps and stuff like that have got all these young people in who the storylines sort of base themselves on it's the most important thing is at that particular moment in time. So you've got a young person, they're in a relationship, maybe 16, 17, 18, that relationship breaks down, and then it's portrayed that that is the most important thing in that young person's life. And I think that this reflects upon society as well. So we're teaching our kids to be over-emotional, if you will. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts to that end.
I just wanted to say that actually, I used to watch EastEnders as well. It probably was about 15 years ago, but I did, and me and my missus did a whistle together. But one thing we noticed, because we about 7 years ago, we moved out of town and moved into the countryside. And we live with a lot less now, with our TV and stuff like that. And what we noticed was that we used to argue quite a lot while we lived in town. And we used to watch EastEnders, like Home and Away, all that crap. Like, sorry if anybody there watches it, apologies. But Well, yeah, as I said, when we moved out, that completely changed. And I think what you're saying, emotional porn, is a really good description there, because I think that those programs are social conditioning 101, absolutely, no, without any other reason why they exist, is purely to manipulate people's behaviour, specifically in relationships, and to keep people focusing on their own personal issues. And as you quite rightly point out, when the young girl in her relationship breaks down, it's made out to be the biggest, most important thing, so that we all are watching that, young kids are watching that, young people are watching that, and it makes us, I think, personally, it makes us focus on our own private, personal little bubble, so that we don't look at wider, bigger aspects, at the same time manipulating our emotional behaviour, right? So I think actually emotional porn is a really good way to describe it.
Well, I would say this is the most dangerous area that we are facing at the moment, because the regime is installing itself by interfering with people's minds. Propaganda is not enough. It's not just being bombarded with information to sway views. We've now got very sophisticated techniques of applied behavioural psychology being used, and they're absolutely being rammed through the programming, whether it's the BBC or ITN or films. They are designed to get at our minds. And I don't know whether I've still got it on my computer, but some years ago I found a paper written by an American GP, and he was talking about how TV programs were packaged in order to cause you mental problems. And if I can remember correctly, and in simple terms, what he would say is that if you watch a series of TV programs and they are individual programs, they can vary. So you could watch a documentary, which could be quite serious or harrowing in its content, but that program finishes, and then the next program is a comedy, and the next program after that is the news or something like that. That your mind is able to take those individual programs and ultimately put them in the appropriate memory box. So you finish watching the program, your brain says, oh, that was a bit of a dark, heavy documentary, I'm going to put that in the documentary memory box, and that's where it goes. And then you watch the comedy, and that's very enjoyable, so that goes in the light-hearted memory box. And then you watch the news, and bits of the news are broken down and put in the appropriate memory box. And what he was talking about were programs that took you on effectively an emotional roller coaster. And I'm going to choose Holby City as an example. So obviously he was talking about American programs, but I'll use Holby City. So you have a program that starts on a negative note or a neutral note. A negative note would be that there'd just been a car accident, so you've got traumatised people, you've got trauma, you've got anxiety in the scene. So maybe it starts on that, or maybe it starts off with just a scene in the hospital. And then it moves through the programme. Maybe there's a scene with a little bit of light-heartedness, a bit of nookie in the broom cupboard, something to get people's sort of interest raised in a bit more of the interesting phase. And then the next minute there will be a scene with a particularly unpleasant argument or squabble between people. Then it might go into a neutral phase, then it might go into something light-hearted, a party. But eventually, when the programme finishes, it finishes on a neutral level, neither happy nor sad, or it ends on an unhappy subject. And what he said happened was that when you finished watching that programme, instead of your mind being able to pack the information into an appropriate memory box, the various fragments of the programme stayed in your more conscious memory while your subconscious brain tried to sort out where they should go. Meanwhile, you move on to the next programme on the TV. So by the time you go to bed, instead of you going to bed with a settled mind, you actually go to bed with a mind which is a bit like your laptop, overworked, and it's trying to sort out all the programs. Now, his argument was very simple, that if this happens to you a few times, a few weeks, a few months, no big deal. The average person's got the mental strength to deal with it. But if you are watching thousands of hours of this type of programming, eventually this is starting to take a toll on your mental strength, and it's starting to take a toll on your personality. It's triggering anxiousness, it's triggering depression, it's triggering listlessness. And I found his analysis extremely interesting, and I started to watch programs analysing for myself this sort of underlying emotional roller coaster. And I'm convinced that these techniques are being used. I believe the extraordinary amount of very, very dark drama with arguments, rapes, violence, deaths, cancers are all designed to drag us into a pretty black pit. And I'm also convinced that the mainstream media makers absolutely know what they're doing with people's minds. They know that these programs are causing problems. And since you've mentioned pornography, I think it's a widely recognised fact that both men and women do react very strongly to pornography, and therefore the increasing frequency of increasingly more pornographic scenes in media productions, TV productions, is designed to drill pornography into people's minds. And of course we've now got to the stage where we've got people campaigning that children should be taught about pornography in school in order to protect them. Well, of course, this is a complete lie. The reason why they want to teach children the dangers of pornography is actually to groom the children to make them more susceptible to watching pornography as they get older. So I think that the mainstream media, particularly TV, visual images, immensely dangerous, not only to adults, but of course to young, impressionable minds. But it isn't only confined to TV. I'm going to embarrass the Archers. If we talk about radio, many years ago, not often, but sometimes at home, we used to have the Archers on, and of course in its early days it was a very light-hearted programme about farming life, with stories about individual people and what was happening on the farm. That was the meat of the story. I watched and listened to that programme change over the years until the final straw for me was that I'd come home from work, I was sat down eating a meal with the family, the Archers was on in the background, and I eventually said to my wife, "Can we turn this off?" And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because what we're actually eating our supper to is the sound of a woman being raped." And this was the length to which they had taken the old Archers and brought it up to date. And the Archers covered murder, it covered different forms of sexuality, it covered drug taking, it covered suicide in the farming community. So instead of it being escapism to help people relax and deal with other pressures in daily life, in my opinion, the Archers has been changed in order to make it a weapon to actually help make people mentally ill. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you get things like the news, your conscious mind is there to process information. Your conscious mind is there to solve problems. So when your conscious mind can't solve a problem, your subconscious mind, which protects the conscious mind, takes over and drags that down into your subconscious. Now, at different individual points, those when your conscious mind cannot cannot compute what is going on because maybe there's too much information, conflicting information, then your conscious mind then goes into trauma and it suffers fear. Now this is where your subconscious comes and takes that over, but there are trigger points, there are trigger words, images, views, numbers that will trigger that trauma and re-traumatise people. And this is I will ask I'm speaking to him next week. I'm going to interview him. He's a guy over in America. But I really would suggest that everybody look into that, the fear-based mind control, the 9/11 one. But I take on board your points, and I do think that everything is getting darker. You get programs such as X Factor, which I don't watch, but I know people do, and I do go on social media and notice that everybody is sort of like, I'm so upset, or that person's been out, and it just seems that everything is exaggerated, and it's made to be exaggerated. Mike?
It's not just television, it's not just radio, it's also schools. And my children are 8 and 9 now, but 3 years ago, when the eldest was learning to read, she brought a book home which was ostensibly about bridges. It looked like a bit of a sort of reference book. And indeed, we opened the first pages and it was about suspension bridges and old bridges and new bridges. And then about halfway through the book, we come to a story, a narrative story, supposedly about bridges. And the first thing I noticed about it is how dark the imagery is. It's all dark colours, it's all happening at night. And then you read the first page and you discover the story isn't about bridges at all. It's about a bridge that has collapsed with a train on it. And it's actually a story about death. And the one image which has stuck in my mind, never mind hers, the image which is stuck in my mind was of a child drowning in the river below the bridge, the collapsed bridge, and the train lying wreckage in the river, and two adults this child reaching out of the water towards two adults and not quite being able to reach, and it was clearly, it was just unbelievably dark imagery. And then on Bonfire Night, or on Guy Fawkes Night, Brian was round at mine, and we were just looking at her latest reading book. She's one of the top readers in their class. They have replaced all the sort of traditional storybooks in the school with what are called graphic novels. And again, the imagery, absolutely dark colours, no brightness about it, no light, no love in these stories. I don't know what you thought of the stuff, but the stories are just unbelievably dark and, in my opinion, damaging. And of course, the children they are forced to read these because they're asked questions about them, and if they don't read them, they haven't done their homework. And I'm trying to offset the effect of this by encouraging them to read traditional children's stories. They're reading The Famous Five, they're reading Narnia, they're reading well, yeah, indeed, and so just trying to offset the effect of this, but it's absolutely coming in through the schools as well, and really unpleasant stuff.
Just sort of reinforce this, because I've said it once and I'm going to say it again. In my opinion, this is the most dangerous threat that we are all facing today, is that we are seeing not just this sort of wider propaganda, but we're now starting to see people, individual people, adults as well as young people, change. Their personalities, their views and values are being changed by the covert application of applied behavioural psychology. And I'm going to say we, the UKColumn, 2 years ago did a major article warning people about the fact that the Cabinet Office was running an applied behavioural psychology unit, which had already at that stage been trialled within government departments, including the Department for what's agriculture now, DEFRA. Tens of millions spent trialling this system within DEFRA, and we showed with evidence that the British government had been working with the French government, so they'd been working jointly on applied behavioural psychology to get government policy through. In fact, one of the leading men, a Frenchman, was called Oliver Willier, and he used to work in the private office of Sarkozy, but he was a university expert on applied behavioural psychology. And one of the documents we highlighted was a British government document, which you can go away and find on Google. Just put in the word mind space as all one word. That's space written S-P-A-C-E, mind space. And in that document, they give you an overview of the government's applied behavioural psychology programme, but they also say in one particular paragraph that using this psychology, people will not realise that they have been changed, or if they do realise that they have somehow become changed, they won't understand how this was done. Now, they use light-hearted examples to say, well, if we ask people nicely to pay their tax, if you pay your taxes, other people in the country will be able to eat. That's a bit of a crude system, but that's the sort of example they're giving. But the reality is that they're pumping in very dark, devious political and social policy through this covert applied behavioural psychology. And I've got to do it, and that is to say, well, of course, this is where I got very interested with the political charity Common Purpose, because it was an NLP practitioner, a very nice guy, who first told me that that's what the real problem was, that Common Purpose was training its future leaders by using neuro-linguistic programming, which meant that people going through the training courses were being given subliminal ideas, views and values, and indeed instructions which they were not consciously aware of. Now, this is unbelievably dangerous stuff, but when we take a look at Parliament and we see, let's use the words, we've got paedophiles, we've got thieves, we've got criminals, we've got liars. This is the meat of Westminster, isn't it? And these people are deciding what applied behavioural psychology techniques are going to be used in order to change our views and values. This is, in my opinion, the most immediate and the most dangerous threat on us, and that is why I get a little bit frustrated sometimes when I see people getting very excited. I'm going to take an issue and we'll see what happens. I'm going to say a lot of people very excited about chemtrails. Now, I've got an interest in chemtrails, and I believe that we are being effectively sprayed or damaged by chemicals in the air. But the thing about chemtrails is I can see them. What makes the applied behavioural psychology attack so dangerous is that if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't see it, and it's everywhere. It's in government policy, it's in your local council, it's in diversity courses in the police, it's in the NHS, it's in schools. And so when people are saying more and more that they see decisions which are madness, which are ridiculous, I am saying to myself, no, these are not madness, because the people making these ridiculous decisions are making those decisions because they are now living in their own particular created reality. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to take up all the rest of the time, but if you want to get me on an emotive subject, if people do not understand what this applied psychological attack is and how it works, you are not going to be able to win in any other argument. You won't win with a common law approach in a court. if the judge and the other barristers have been neuro-linguistically programmed. They will not respond to you because they will be incapable of understanding reasoned arguments from common law. If you deal with a politician who has been heavily programmed, Cameron has certainly been NLP through common purpose, he won't understand the arguments you put to him. That's why people interpret it as arrogance, but it's not all arrogance. A lot of it is the fact you're dealing with a person so heavily reframed they can't actually understand the arguments and emotions you're putting forward.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. I am very aware of the time, and we are sort of moving on quite late. So, are we okay? Just one more question before we say. Well, I would like to say thank you very much for joining us, for agreeing to this Skype thing. It's been absolutely superb. We've got another question here from Mark.
I totally agree with that as well. I was going to mention it before, when Mike mentioned about the kind of books that children bring home. I have looked into what the European Union, their fans have got into the education system with that kind of thing. Now, my question was before, you really did hit on it a little bit as well there, Brian, about the NLP. I mean, where does it stand? I'm really not clued up with this, but where does it stand in a legal sense when I'm quite aware that it can make people very poorly? I mean, in a legal sense, and I know for a fact it's all over the NHS, it's within the police force, it's being used in the schools, it's talking teachers to pupils, and you've covered it yourselves at UKColumn. I mean, over the last few years even. What's the legal sense if someone were to be able to prove that in a court of law?
Right, well, you hit the nail on the head there, because in order to... right, where do we start? For somebody to use applied psychology on an individual without their knowledge or consent, thank you, is assault. It is that simple, because you're interfering with their mind, you are attacking them, it is assault. And I think I'm correct in saying that in America, quite a few years ago, there were a number of cases successfully taken to court where people won damages as a result of being attacked by the use of applied psychology. However, what we are now seeing is not only the sophistication of the techniques being used, but also the fact that we've now got this situation where our own government is prepared to openly say it's using the techniques. The trouble is, the onus is on the victim to prove that it was the applied behavioural psychology that caused them to suffer mental harm. And how the hell do you prove this? Now, I can tell you at the moment there's some interesting things happening, in as much as the psychiatric profession. Now, we could have some discussions as to whether they're good guys or bad guys, but I'm going to say that I know of people I put in both those categories. But the thing about psychiatrists is they do have to qualify, and they are accountable to a professional body for their work, for their action. And the same is true for clinical psychologists. They also train properly and ultimately have to be part of a body to be accountable. But the danger comes from the use of NLP and its derivatives like cognitive behavioural therapy or psychotherapy, where anybody can put up a brass plate and then take clients, but they are absolutely not accountable to anybody. And although there is a voluntary professional body for those practicing NLP, it does not have any status or clout. But I can say to you that at the moment there's effectively a professional war going on between psychiatrists and clinical psychologists on one hand and the psychotherapists, because the psychiatrists and the clinical psychologists are now finally starting to say that psychotherapy, particularly in the hands of unqualified and unregulated people, can be exceptionally dangerous. But the key thing is, if the onus is on you to prove that you suffered some form of mental illness as a result of going on the common purpose course, how do you actually prove that?
Thank you. It's John here again. I had a question about, I'm sure probably a great hero of everyone in this room, John Harris. How's he doing these days? Have you guys heard anything from him recently? Is he still okay?
He's still alive, kicking. He's still doing work as a carpenter. He's still doing some talks locally. I haven't spoken to him for, I can say, probably about 3 months or something like that. So he's still there. He's still interested in what's going on. But I think it's true to say that after all the excellent work, and I do mean that because in my opinion, John Harris was the man who really started to get people thinking about what was going on in the courts and the use of legal language and common law, statute law. I think and the drive for corporatism, so I think he did a huge amount for that. But I think also the speaking circuit took his toll on him, and I know that in the end he decided he needed to get a bit of balance back in his life. So as far as I know, John is alive, well and kicking. He's still doing work a bit more behind the scenes, but obviously we're not seeing him sort of as such a mega internet personality or a large-scale audience speaker.
Superb, thank you very much. Well, I think we've monopolised just about as much of your time as we feel, we'd like to. Well, we'd like to have you all. Sorry, carry on, right?
Can I ask you guys a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, the first one is, this is the first time we've ever done anything like this. We're extremely interested to know whether it's something we should have a go at again. Obviously, we'd be happy to do it with you guys, but do you think this is something that other groups or other audiences might enjoy?
Well, certainly, I think we're all in agreement that we would love to do this again, and we think that it would be of benefit to any other groups for you to do this sort of interactive. I mean, it's all well and good. We watch the UKColumn live. Most of us watch UKColumn live, but you can't, apart from the little chat box, you can't really sort of interact. So to be able to ask questions, I think is invaluable, and I would encourage any of the groups that want to participate in something like this to do so. Amy just wants to make a point.
Yeah, just really, this is what we said earlier about doing it from the bottom up rather than the top down, which is what you guys do really well. And certainly I feel that that's happened here tonight. And sure, anything that does that, for me, is an absolute bonus. I definitely feel the benefit of this and would love to do this again, definitely.
Right, okay, thanks very much for that. The other thing I just wanted to say, for the gentleman who spoke about his police friend, I think we've got to encourage as many police to stay in the job as possible, because they are going to be the people to clean up the police force.
Yep.
Who's going to clean up the judiciary? Judges. Who cleans up the NHS? Doctors. Who cleans up the policemen? So we should be trying desperately to persuade the good guys to stay in, because we're going to need them.
That could be why they've got an accelerated pension scheme and encouraged to get out after 30 years once they realise what's going on.
Well, I can't talk because I took a redundancy package from the Navy.
Good for you.
Well, looking back, of course, I started to see stuff going on which I didn't like. And then, of course, eventually the redundancy packages came, so I decided to go. But, when I now look back with a bit more experience, I think those packages were designed to get people out.
Exactly, yeah.
Sorry, I'd just like to ask how you found this experience, you know, sort of being able to interact with people that you're talking to.
Well, even sorry, where are you? Sheffield, isn't it?
Yeah. Sheffield, yeah.
Even though it's an audience for Sheffield, we've survived. We found it
Fantastic. Oh, well, I'd just like to finish off and just tell you here that the weather is quite cold. It's going to be cold tomorrow, and I think it's either going to be cold, sunny, or rainy for the rest of the week and the month, probably.
It's a bummer, isn't it? The same weather just travels around the country.
Never.
And one question, final one, is have any of your team come across a really excellent guy called Martin Brighton?
No, we've not. No, apart from Tony has, haven't you, Tony? Tony has, yeah.
Well,
yeah, and a couple of one or two. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I will say to you that Martin Brighton hides his light under a bushel. He's not a great one for putting his name forward, but you have got in Sheffield one